Welcome to ThinkTech's virtual meetups for the summer season, an initiative organized by the Saudi Ministry of Communications and Information Technology. ThinkTech aims to create a stimulating digital environment and to spread digital awareness about emerging technologies. In this optic, we are happy to introduce you to a series of meetups focused on emerging technologies. Today we have the session, Is Your Technology Operating Model Ready? My name is Christian Stör, and I'm a partner based in Abu Dhabi, leading the McKinsey Core Tech practice in the Middle East, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm joined by my senior partner colleague, Naufal Khan from Chicago in the US. Naufal, could I ask you to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. My name is Naufal Khan. I'm a senior partner with McKinsey Digital based out of Chicago. I lead our global technology strategy and management service line, which focuses basically primarily on working with the CIOs and technology leaders in transforming their technology function in the organizations, dealing with topics ranging from technology operating model, org, talent, all the way to sourcing and how to manage and drive large technology transformations.
Welcome, Naufal. Thank you. We're quite excited to have you here today and to share your view of how to set up your operating model for success. Look, as a starting question, I'd love to get a bit of a broader overview, right? How has the overall situation for CIOs changed?
I think one of the things that has happened, and it has been gradually happening over the last few years, and perhaps actually got accelerated by the events over the last 6 months related to COVID, is that the role of the CIO has become very prominent and become very pivotal and central. Like I said, this was already happening pre-COVID because the organizations were starting to realize that it's very hard for them to basically drive digital transformations in the business, or even at times to actually drive operational excellence through technology without actually having technology at the center of it, which continued to elevate the role of the CIO as well as the role of IT in an organization for a good period of time, and you see very clear markers for that. You will see a larger number of technology leaders or CIOs on boards of organizations. We do research every year, and we have seen that number rise on a regular basis. You also see a very strong desire in our surveys of senior business executives and senior IT executives. We have seen very strong desire on part of business executives to actually have IT work more as a partner rather than a supplier. So the significance on the function and the level of what I would call criticality and partnership has changed quite dramatically over the last few years. Then if you add to that the COVID element that happened, and all of a sudden elements such as work from home became very important, which placed a very heavy emphasis on the technological infrastructure and capabilities of the company. The need for cyber went up significantly because we saw a surge in cyber attacks, as well as a lot of the elements of the business. For example, safety of the employees and contact tracing within the large company environments became important. And most importantly, how do you serve your customers, whether you're B2B or B2C, how do you engage and serve your customers in a safe, and in many cases, basically touchless or contact-free customer service, and those elements became important. And if you think about it, the CIO and the IT function is at the center of all of this. So over the last, I would say, 6 months, more than ever, the role has catapulted into significance. And it is both, I think, a great opportunity as well as a great challenge to overcome. So that's a little bit, sorry, that was a long answer to a very simple question. But we have seen this role evolve and only evolve over the last few years, and it significantly accelerate over the course of this year.
Thank you. I think that is quite helpful to set the scene, right? You said cyber attacks, safety of employees, COVID, there are a lot of things that are now hitting the CIO. How is then IT itself changing to cater with all these different changes that now come outside?
So I think I know that the word transformation gets used a lot, but I think the transformation was was a big agenda item on most of the business corporations, and particularly most of the CIOs, and has been over the last several years. Again, in our annual survey, we continually test for basically what kind of transformations do you have planned? Do you have unplanned this year? Did you get the results and outcomes from it? And you see continuously, you see a rise in that. What this means though is there is still a question of where should the CIOs start the transformation. One thing is for certain, a bit of a step change is needed in many of these areas. For example, cloud has been very popular and there has been a journey to the cloud, but for a lot of the traditional large-scale brick-and-mortar company, the transition of cloud is quite non-trivial. It's a huge undertaking because of the amount of legacy that often sits and has to be migrated. So that is a big question. But if you think about it, there are a whole bunch of other big questions. How do we do, what do we do with our architecture? Because in order for us to migrate a certain way, we had to do something with our IT architecture too. What would that mean in terms of data? Because data and advanced analytics has also become a really big question. What would that mean for that? So there are lots of different areas within IT that need to be brought together. And one of the biggest challenge that we see for organizations is where do you start? Do I start with Agile? Do I start with org and op model? Should I start with basically by bringing in a partner and getting a really good sourcing model in place? Should I fix the architecture first or should I fix the data first? Should I fix all of the data first? So all these questions, and if you think about it, each one of those could actually take, to completely get done, could take multiple years. So I think the way this is manifesting a little bit is that what does that CIO agenda and what does that IT agenda looks like? One of the things that we have been doing over the last, I would say, 2-3 years, we have spoken with about 700 CIOs. And we have developed a framework for this transformation, which hinges on 3 major vectors. We call this thing tech forward. I'm happy to, by the way, it's available and I'm happy to share. It's called tech forward, and it basically looks at a tech transformation along 3 vectors. The first vector is much more around the role and the mandate of IT. The second vector focuses on basically how do you your IT delivery capabilities and how do you actually deliver IT services. And the third one focuses on future-proofing the foundation. So to be very explicit, in the first one, we include elements such as what is the quality of partnership between business and IT. So we call this a little bit, we call this vector reimagine the role of technology. So how do you partner with business on the strategy? What is the role that IT plays? What is the business technology business IT operating model look like? Both how IT partners with business, but as well as how IT organizes itself. And lastly, how does IT help, or how does technology help as a steward of the digital user experience? How does it drive customer experience? The second one is around reinventing the technology delivery, which is agile at scale. How do we deliver things in a much more nimble and iterative manner? How do you basically think of infrastructure driving what I would call extensive end-to-end automation, moving towards cloud? Then there are 2 elements around capability, which is, do we have the right talent, and do we have the right type of technology partnerships to deliver in an agile manner? And the last one, as I was saying, last vector is around future-proofing the foundation, which is around a flexible business-backed architecture, a thoughtful data architecture and data approach that allows for organizations to make decisions in a smarter way. And lastly, having cyber defenses that preempt the evolving threats. Those are the 3 vectors. And how to prioritize these different areas is dependent a little bit on an organization's context. They're not just basically how they are, but also what the industry is looking like, what are some of their burning pain points that they need to quickly address. In our view, you can't do all these things at the same time, but you need to come up with an order and a sequence that makes sense for you.
You made my next question easy because you asked it, but you said, look, where should CIOs start the transformation? Now that I have this framework from the 3 vectors, how do I think about the starting point?
Right. It's as I said, I mean, this is, it's not a, it needs to be tailored for the organization. So for example, you may have an organization in you may have a business basically which is in a situation where they need to deliver products very, very quickly. They have cost pressures or they have revenue pressures, and different combination of these would push on different kinds of levers, right? So in many cases though, when we ask our clients, and we talk to the CIOs and we say, so where would you want to normally start? We see that usually at least one play emerges from each of the vectors. So first one, which is around reimagining the role of technology, there's one basic piece, which is around basically IT's mandate, which is probably not a lot of work, but there is a lot of senior level alignment and cultural conversations to be had around, hey, how should technology partner with business? But aside from that, a big play from the first vector that comes up is around technology operation and operating model. It's a little bit like, how does IT org and IT operating model best work with business as well as best organize itself? On the second one, usually the first one that pops up is talent, and then a little bit around, do we have the right infrastructure and delivery methodologies in place? But talent often comes up as the biggest one from the second. And from the last one, data has been coming up increasingly, particularly over the last 6 to 8 months, as basically data-driven decision-making has become important along so many different fronts.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that's quite helpful. And can we bring this to life? Like, how have you seen companies actually respond out there, right? Maybe you can share a bit of how your clients responded to this and what we can learn from that.
Well, I think nearly all the clients, as we go through our research, all the clients have some kind of a major transformation on the books, something that they have finished recently, and something that they are planning ahead. And they think of transformations as individual plays. We think of it as a whole integrated set of plays, right? A couple of topics that have become quite front and center have been around digitization. It's become quite a big topic and has become an even bigger one over the course of this year. This is a lot more around digitization of either customer or employee engagement. Specifically, think of it more in terms of customer and employee journeys and how do you digitize them increasingly. Ultimately, it yields to a whole host of benefits, both from a COVID lens, but also from a customer experience or an employee experience lens. The second area where we are seeing companies move very quickly is, or wants to move very quickly, is on the cloud front. And in fact, one of my quotes that I won't forget, 1 month into the COVID crisis, I was sitting with a client, with a CIO client, and what I heard was that I wish we were 2 to 3 years ahead on our cloud journey, which is something which was an issue that the cloud was one area that they have been thinking about for the last 2-3 years, hadn't made a lot of headway other than in pockets, specific pockets on specific use cases and stuff. And at that point, it became very, very, very clear to them that given the situation that they were in through COVID, them being a few years ahead would have been actually quite important. So cloud is the second thing, which is where the companies are taking a very strong look and saying, how do we accelerate this journey? And the third one that we are seeing, which is perhaps the most important, less technical, but the most important component, is around rebalancing of spend. So I'm intentionally not saying cost cutting, because everybody, nearly everybody realizes that the recovery will be tech-led. So you can't necessarily cut all the tech cost out or cut tech cost out, which is very different, by the way, from the banking crisis that we had some time back, right? So unlike the financial crisis, I think there is a clear understanding that this is not about cutting tech funding. This is much more about rebalancing that spend and taking a hard look at that what are the areas that are that we need to spend on now that will move the needle. So there is a very one big way that we are seeing companies respond, and it had already started before COVID. It just got massively amplified due to the uncertainty and cost concerns that some of the businesses have around how are we going to rebalance our costs so that we can, at least to some extent, self-fund some of these transformation elements like cloud and digitization and stuff.
Thank you. If I would now deep dive a bit onto the IT architecture element, right? Because we said all of this is set up. How would you advise the CIO to change the IT architecture to support the digitalization, the cloud, rebalancing, the agile, right? Like all these things happening at the same time. How do I think about architecture?
So I think that, Christian, the answer is a little bit embedded actually in your question, which is how do you change the architecture to support the other elements? We think that this is actually fundamentally the biggest, one of the best ways to modernize your architecture or to transform your architectural landscape, right? Which is a business-backed manner. There are oftentimes, and you see that, is that there is a little bit of a push that, okay, we are going to go to microservices, and then basically you set up this multi-year architecture transformation program. And my general view is that this is where money goes to die, right? Because, and I'm exaggerating a little bit and being a little bit unfair, but these are these large architecture programs where a lot of funding goes in them. It's not clear to everybody what happened, because nobody can, people outside IT cannot see and feel the architecture. They just know that something was done at a huge expense to the systems. We're not sure what was done, but we're not sure how it changed things for us, but we did pay a lot of money for it. Our view a little bit on this is that even architecture is something that should be done, IT architecture should be done in a very business-backed manner. And I'll give a very specific example of that is one of our clients, for example, when they started to drive a massive digital program, starting to roll out, basically starting to digitize their stores, right? A large number of global stores, right? Which required significant amount of architecture uplift, often at an individual store level, even. Because different stores in different geographies were running different versions of the platform. In their case, they did it we worked with them and took a very hard look at exactly what components of architecture need to be transformed for those particular features and capabilities that you're rolling out. So instead of doing a massive, complete end-to-end tech rehaul, you actually prioritize those in line with what benefits are needed for the business, right? And that way basically that spend gets prioritized, you directly enable it, and you can actually often, as you're rolling that out, that funding can actually be part of the business benefits that you're delivering. So this way, your business partners are very clear where and what types of improvements you're doing. You're doing it in a business-backed way, so that it's actually delivering business impact right away instead of 2 years later when things might have changed. And lastly, you're being very thoughtful and mindful about how you prioritize, because architecture is one thing you can keep fixing it forever and it will never get done. In this case, you're doing it as you're delivering So this is a little bit of our philosophy. I oversimplified it a little bit, but this is a little bit of our philosophy on how you drive architecture transformation. You would probably take the same kind of a lens, even if you're moving to cloud. You would take the same kind of a lens as to what is the business impact that I'm trying to drive, and based on that, where should I start?
Very clear, very clear. Do you see where there's a perfect target thing to look for? Because you said cloud, clear, right? People wish they had done cloud 3 years earlier. So there seems to be a clear trend direction. Do you see this for the other vectors as well? There's a clear convergence towards the target state?
I don't. And actually, even on cloud, right? I think the answer is going to be a little bit, it depends, right? You will have organizations for whom it would make to, say, move only half of their workloads to the cloud environment, whereas others, it might make sense to move all of it or 90% of it, right? So I think, and the same thing on the architecture front is the architecture part is even more what I would call even more to an organization's context, a little bit of what it is. So I think these are decisions that need to be made in a very thoughtful and tailored manner. In general, though, on the architecture front, depending upon how much legacy and how much tech debt a company has accumulated, right? Chances are that there is always some work that is needed there, right? The key is a little bit to prioritize the work. So I don't know so in short, basically, it's hard to give a very clear answer. But in general, moving towards a much more modular microservices type of architecture is where organizations are moving, and it makes sense. And on the cloud front, you take a little bit of a hard look and say how much of that is actually feasible to move over. Because some of the stuff, it might just make sense to actually stay on the legacy platform you have. It just might not make either economic or business sense. I mean, either economic or even technological sense to actually move those workloads.
Thank you. If I take this to the next level, I think you mentioned architecture is changing. It obviously depends on how it changes. What I understood from you at the same time is to say, look, we have products, we have platforms, we have microservices, we have basically everything. How do I make sense out of this? Which way should I be leaning as a CIO?
Okay. So I think one big shift that we are seeing, and I mentioned it earlier, it is part of that first vector, which is around reimagining the role of technology. And this is by far one of the most common question we get is around the product and platform operating model, right? We have an article on that out, and when we did an external webinar on it, I believe we had about 200 people join, which is not something. I don't think that is normal for typical operating model conversations in the past, but this actually tells you how important the topic has become. Before I jump into the product and platform model, I just want to point out one shift, which is so one thing that has started to shift a little bit is that you will increasingly hear technology leaders talk about we need to switch from a project to a product mindset, project to a product type of a model. Right? And that's a little bit to what this speaks to. So basically, traditionally, all the strategy, you had a list of projects. In the best organizations, those projects were closely aligned to, IT projects were closely aligned to specific business priorities. IT worked on this portfolio of projects. The annual process, you did it again, and then you did it again. The idea now is a little bit to take what I would call a bit of a longer view, which is think a little bit more in terms of what are the capabilities that I'm trying to enable for my customers or my users, basically for my users, whether employees or customers. What are the capabilities that I am enabling? And let me take a long view of what this would look like 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now, and maybe 18 months from now, right? And then, so instead of thinking, I'm going to quickly implement this project and deliver a solution, the thinking is a little bit more like, what do I want the future of this experience or this capability to look like? And then let me plan toward that and work towards that plan. Now, one can argue, and this is maybe I'm saying, maybe I'm committing heresy here by saying this. One could argue that I could argue that this is not entirely a new thing, right? Even in the old days, when people did project-based work, or the idea was always that you should, when you're working on a project, you should be taking that business capabilities lens and the architecture lens and what does it look like over time. Although that didn't really happen in practice a whole lot. Whereas taking a product mindset nowadays and thinking of it, what is the product that I'm trying to build over, it just makes that mental shift a little bit easier. So that's a little bit of the product part. And then what are the platforms? So basically you will hear product and you will hear platforms. So product, in the way we think about it, products here are basically specific digital assets that you're going to build to enable user journeys. These could be employee journeys and employee-facing products. These could be customer journeys, customer-facing products. They could be B2B, they could be B2C, but effectively, they enable, improve, take friction out of user experiences and user journeys. Platforms are basically technology assets that serve or that enable many of these products. So instead of talking in abstract, let me just explain that. Let me just kind of give an example. So basically for a retail business, the ability to search, whether on your phone, whether on the website, whether physically in the store, whether off a kiosk, that search might be a product, right? An ability to search for goods to buy. Whereas a back-end system that actually has the inventory, right? Or an ERP system that actually supports and runs across the supply chain, enables multiple products, would be a platform. So very specific capabilities that an employee or user might have, which you enable through multiple channels, whether it's a physical channel, a web channel, a mobile channel. That's often we think that often those are the products, whereas the underlying platforms, whether it's your logistics systems or whether your store system, they are basically the platforms that enable various of these products. One of the hardest questions in all of this is, how do we define products and platforms? Much more so products than platforms. At times you will see organizations go a little bit like, oh yeah, this is my XYZ system, this is a product. So there is a temptation to take a system and call that system a product. In our view, basically, that's actually less helpful. In some cases, it might make sense if it's a very narrow system that really enables a particular journey or something, but otherwise, basically what you really want to be thinking of is in terms of the journeys and the capabilities that you want to provide throughout those journeys as products. So that's a little bit of a thing, and that often is the most important and perhaps the hardest question for technology leaders who are contemplating a product and platform model.
Do you have an approach that helps me to think through whether my product is too small or not? You gave me an idea with systems, but now let's say I buy into this concept. How do I now start thinking through the product definition? Right.
So there are 3 or 4 components, and it's a little bit easier, given the typical consultant that I am. It's a little bit easier for me to use visuals to explain that, but there are 3 or 4 big questions to ask. One of them I already talked about is that what is a product and what is a platform? And for my particular organization, how are we going to define products and platforms, right? And thinking about the different models. In some places, for example, mobile app is a product. In some cases, you might say mobile is a channel. That capability is a product that can exist multiple places. But by the way, so you will see that question that, okay, maybe it's a little too soon for us to move to a completely capability model. Initially, we'll have a hybrid. So that's the one big question. What's a product? What's a platform? There is a second question, which is around how are we going to partner with business when you are in a product and platform model? Why is that important? It's important because in typical digital non-native, the rest of the organization is not organized by product. So your IT demand is going to come in from marketing, it's going to come in from ops, it's going to come in from commercial, it's going to come in from different organizational business units. Because the rest of the organization, they're just sending you things that they need. And typically, if you're enabling user or customer journeys, the user journeys cut across your organizational unit, which is, by the way, the main reason why they are awesome. To take a journey-based approach is so great because it actually, you're serving the user on their need rather than according to your organizational structure. So the demand is going to come in from different units. I think one question for CIOs and for IT leaders is that how am I going to do work intake or demand intake, and how am I going to partner with business? Because it's also probably not going to be helpful for you to say, oh, business leader X, you want capability Y. Well, for that you need to talk to these 3 product teams. That's not helpful either, right? Because they're going to come up with that I need this, which might be 1 product, which might be 4 products. So one thing is, second question other than product one is that how are we going to put together what I would call that business IT interaction model, where you can actually translate the incoming demand to appropriately to products and platforms. And the reason that's an important question is that you want to be able to do it, but you want to do it in a way that does not add bureaucracy and burden. And velocity being such an important factor right now, go-to-market being such an important factor, you don't want to add layers in a way that actually will slow things down. So that's the second question. And this is where we bring in the notion of a delivery office, right? A delivery office that helps integrate between the products and the platform teams. And that helps integrate the demand. And then the third question is that how do you synchronize your products and platform teams, right? It's fine and well for me to be taking my mobile app and releasing something every 2 weeks, right? I'll do the quick sprint. It'll be very, very hard for me to do that with my SAP installation that I have. Right? Or if I have another, like an internally built large system, it's going to be just hard for me to do that release every 2 weeks, right? So you're going to have some kind of a roadmap and plan for your platforms, which is going to be at a slightly different cadence than your products. So how do you integrate those two together? And this is another big question, and this is another place where we think that the delivery office helps. And lastly, there is a big question around the other mechanics, which is how do you want to do funding model in this scenario? The model lends itself quite well to what I would call stage gate funding and impact-driven funding. So how do you want to do the funding? How do you want to prioritize? How do you want to do the prioritization? So there are a bunch of other questions that come with it, but those are the 3 or 4 big questions, I would say. But I'm sure, of course, there are a bunch of other questions that are going to pop up over time, but those are the 3 or 4 big things to think about as you're contemplating a product platform model.
Excellent.
And by the way, one thing important to notice is that I did not say agile anywhere in this whole conversation, right? So the agile works very well in this model, but I also want to kind of point out that I'm intentionally separating methodology from the operating model, because you would have systems where you cannot apply a very traditional agile model. You might take some principles or some iterative principles or agile principles, but it's hard to completely apply there, which is why I think it's helpful to kind of separate what I would call methodology, delivery methodology, from the operating model.
Perfect. You strive the topic that CIOs normally are very keen to understand better and ideally manage. exactly demand management around everything. You normally start at the beginning of the year with 300%, and then eventually you end up with still 120% and always ask you to do more. Now you introduce the concept of delivery office that might help me to actually get everything synchronized, fix demand management, and solve the world. So I think that would be an interesting topic to deep dive a bit into of how that actually works then.
Sure. And by the way, in nearly all the again, one could argue, if when you're as old as I am, one can come in and argue and say, hey, I remember, like, you were supposed to have an enterprise-wide plan anyway. Most of the places have this nice demand management organization that maintain an enterprise-wide. So yeah, so I think you're just coming up with a fancy name. To some extent, that's actually true, right? The main difference being, so basically the delivery office, the role is very clear. How it gets structured is going to be a little bit different depending upon different organizations, but the role is basically to help basically manage demand. And typically, you would organize it in such a way that it's very clear for business who their point of contact is. So you don't want to have business to be going to multiple points of contact for work, right? There is going to be a little bit of a question, is that what type of products are we talking and where do you want the product owner to be? There's going to be a real conversation to be had, is that do you want the product owners on the business side, which we think usually is a good answer, better answer, but practically speaking, often you will actually see some kind of technical product managers or technical delivery managers on the IT side who are kind of playing the product owner role. It a little bit depends on the level of maturity in the organization around product management and product ownership. Right? So there's that element as to how do you, so basically delivery office effectively is there to a little bit, you will organize it a little bit in a way that it helps provide a very clarity of roles, clarity of partnership type of an interface to the business, and internally it makes sure that the roadmaps, in addition to the roadmap that you have for your business, on this is when you're going to deliver thing X for you. The business capability X will be delivered by that time. Whereas internally, it might mean 2 products and some updates to the platform, right? And if that's the case, then they also basically, they are the keeper of what I would call they are the maestros, right? So they are the keeper of that integrated plan, and they will work with the product and the platform teams to make sure that this plan that is being developed is actually well synchronized, right? So they are the choreographers, so to speak, of this delicate dance that's going to happen, right? Which will make sure that things get delivered. So I think in terms of how the delivery office is organized, I'm intentionally staying away from it because I think it very much depends on how the business is organized, as well as ultimately how you define what the products and the platforms are for the internal organization.
Fantastic. Look, can you elaborate a bit on the benefits of if you get this right? Just to see what are you seeing there if you then, have all of this established, product, platform, and you take things forward?
Yeah, I think, listen, there are hard benefits, there are soft benefits. In the old days, we always talked about faster, cheaper, better. In many ways, that hasn't changed, right? But I think there is a clear benefit. There are a couple of the very specific benefits. One of them is a little bit around overall the organization taking a bit of a longer view, and what I would call a more deliberate and purposeful view of what it is that they are trying to change. So it's a bit of a softer benefit in my mind, but you have someone really thinking about the user experience, whether employee experience or the customer experience that you're providing, right? And working towards a really thoughtful, aspirational end state, which is never an end state, by the way, because by the time you are there, you're already thinking a year after that, right? But like this evolving, continued, what I would call innovation and continued evolution of providing a better experience to your users. So I think it actually instills that mindset, in my view, right? while instilling that mindset, particularly, and I'm particularly talking about even for IT, right? While instilling that mindset, I also think it actually creates a degree of closeness between IT and your tech teams and what I would call your customers or the end users. Because in the past, IT has, especially in organizations where IT has been treated a little bit like a supplier, IT is almost basically that linkage that an IT or a tech employee has to the business or to the customer is weakened. And this actually strengthens that. And which has both, one, which allows you to actually deliver better for your customer. And two, it's actually quite what I would call professionally rewarding and encouraging for your tech employees. Right? And then, of course, there are the classic benefits that would come from it, which hopefully you're actually delivering very targeted, very focused experiences to the users. You're not running into that constant issue of, well, like in the term, like the two-speed term, right? That gets used that, oh, but I'm moving at a faster speed. This is moving at a slower speed. These guys are not ready. And you kind of get out of that a little bit because everything is synchronized. So it will actually speed things up. And it will actually create a much more, what I would call a greater degree of collaboration within your IT department. So what I'm calling it better quality, better end product, faster, and I think a whole bunch of what I would call organizational benefits that will both strengthen the partnership between business and IT and strengthen the partnership within IT itself and give a greater sense of purpose and connection for your technology teams to the customers and to the users whose lives they're making easy.
Okay, now that I know the benefits, and it sounds almost too good to be true, right? You solve all the problems I have had in IT. So how do I make this transformation successful? What are the challenges? So how do I think now, how do I get there?
Right. I think, again, this kind of brings me back a little bit to what I would call the earlier when we were talking about transformation and the vectors and what to do when, right? I think the key a little bit over here is almost the first two things that I talked about, which is basically establishing aligning within the organization on the elevated role that technology can play is a very important one. Incidentally, it's probably not one where you have to go and do a lot of work, but it's one which is a much more important question of alignment among the senior leaders in the organization, as well as a bit of a cultural change in the middle management layers, where traditionally IT might be viewed as differently. So I think that's a very important question, and that's something that you start on yesterday, right? Because that will enable a lot of the other elements, and that will give what I would call technology leaders certain amount of latitude over certain decisions and any big transformational moves that they want to make. Because without that culture change, without that mindset change across the organization, a lot of the other elements would be operational and executional, but I don't know if they would fundamentally change. Now, on the op model piece, and the op model, by the way, is an area which is going to hugely benefit from that elevated role and partnership that business and IT have, because the minute you are seen as a equal business partner and potentially a partner who will help business disrupt status quo and leap forward, a lot of the other conversations become easier. So that's one place which is for sure almost, I think, like it's a prerequisite or needs to be done in parallel. The second one is on the op model itself. I think the good news is that other than the business IT partnership area, much of that is within a CIO or a technology leader's domain. It's in their area. This is not necessarily something where you go and you kind of have to, this is not turning off applications where you have to go and explain it to the business users, hey, we're turning off. So this is something which is a little bit in your domain, in your organization, right? So I think the main thing over there is to, first of all, determine basically, is this model am I ready for this model? So I'll tell you, for example, I have one client, and just given where they are in terms of their maturity, we debated about rolling this out, and it wasn't clear whether they were ready for it, right? And one can argue that they could be ready for it, but they did not feel it. So you do need to actually build within IT, you need to build among the IT leaders the organizational resolve and then buy-in your IT top layer, right? But the rest of it is a lot more. So that's where you start asking these questions that what are some of the major pain points we have? What is the quality of partnership we have today with IT? How transparent are we, right? I personally think that transparency of your portfolio, transparency of the IT portfolio, the more transparency tech leaders provided to the business, the better, which is unfortunately not the case, not how it happens in real life, but so basically, what is the quality of the partnership? How much transparency do we have? How well do we understand the different projects? How well aligned are they to the needs that are coming in? So a bunch of those questions of understanding the pain points, and then basically making a call whether this is the right model or not. And I would suspect in many of the organizations, this will end up being a good right model. And then basically you start with the 4 questions question. If we do move to this model, how will we define the product, right? What would our work intake and demand management look like? How would delivery office manifest itself? And then there are questions, the rest of the questions around how will funding work and some of the other elements. And much of that, by the way, we explained that in an article. We have an article out, Is Your Tech, literally, which is the same as the title of this presentation. So I would encourage basically people who are listening to this or who are going to view this to go out and take a look at that article.
Very good. I think that then summarizes a bit of our discussion as well in writing and gives some time to reflect and go even deeper. I would like to build on your question you just said. Am I ready for this model? So then let's switch this around. What would you say is a typical trigger point for a CIO to say, A, I can't continue as is, and B, this might potentially be my model?
So I think, that is literally actually what I was saying, is that basically it's a little bit taking a look at is that what are some of the pain points that they are seeing, right? Now, if the organization has, like let's say that you're an organization that was wildly successful in making a move, let's say you moved 60% of 80% of the work you're doing nowadays in Agile. This is true Agile. Everything is getting delivered fine on time. You have a great partnership. You don't need it, right? An operating model is not like a requirement. It's a tool to help you do things better, right? But chances are that I have yet to see an organization like this. So chances are that this is something, even if not in its entirety, parts of it would be useful. And I think that's a little bit of the question to ask. And the first question to a little bit ask is that if you were to move to a more of a product mindset, is this something that is going to benefit is it something that is going to actually have a transformative impact on how I'm delivering? It's possible that some organization is doing the traditional project type of work incredibly well, and they're doing it so well that they're running like a well-oiled machine. And when they think of project, they always take a longer-term view and everything. Is that the case? Then no need. So chances are that at this point in time, given what's happening in the industry, given how fast you need to move, given how you need to deliver much more tailored user experiences, that is something which is going to be helpful.
Let me translate this from a CIO into the people side of things, right? How do I take the organization onto that journey? How do I, as a CIO, think about enabling the people? And please also feel free to elaborate on the talent you mentioned earlier, right? So that we then just basically take the whole people side of things in this operating model change.
Right. So I think from the business side, the first and foremost is not actually the op model play, but the play around the role and partnership of IT with the business, right? One of my clients, when she first started, she took on the role as a CIO. The first thing she did was she put down on a piece of paper what the role of a partner looks like, what the role of a supplier looks like. She went and spoke with her peers, all reported to the CEO, saying, what role do you want me to play? I can play the role of a supplier. I can play the role of a partner. I guarantee you, everybody listening to this, that 80% of the time, you will, at least 80% of the time, and most likely 100% if you're doing it in person, you will hear that people want technology to play a partner role. We do this survey every year. When we ask this question, 80% of both business and IT respondents, that consistently 80% of them say that they want IT to play a partner role. And consistently, only 20 to 24% actually have IT playing a partner role, which I think is an interesting dynamic, right? So I think that's a little bit of that's the first thing from the business side, is that understanding what those two different roles mean. And in order to achieve those, how can business support that, right? Which means that in some ways it would mean that you don't need to come to me and say, buy this solution X for me, or implement this technology solution Y for me. Rather, the conversation needs to be much more around, I want this particular capability to be enabled. And then let's talk about what's the right solution for that. So I think that's the first thing for the business. And then the second thing from the business standpoint is that, and I do think that ultimately those are the best kind of partnership, is that, is the business ready? And in many cases, they are not. And they're a little bit consumed with the next 6 months, next 3 months, next set of business will look like. But is there an opportunity for the business to have, for business side to have what I would call, to take an ownership of product? The minute they start thinking of it in terms of product, then even if they're not organized by product, you can actually create those cross-functional teams where you have product owners from the business side, and they usually have the best view. At least from a customer standpoint, they have the best view. But if you think about it, even from if you're doing employee journey, that is an HR journey, your HR partner is the best product owner for that, because they know exactly the experience that they want. So I think that's a little bit of that's perhaps the other unlock, is that what role does business play? And we think that business taking an active role on the product side. And by business, I mean both support functions like HR and finance, as well as business functions like commercial ops, marketing. I just think that them taking a real role in that is hugely helpful.
Perfect. What are lessons learned? So if you take forward, we now discussed how to take the people, the IT architecture. If I now see companies going through this or trying to go through this, what can I learn from them if I'm now a CIO thinking of going this journey?
So I think if I elevate myself a little bit just from the op model conversation, the op model conversation, the lessons were the first two plays around the establishing a alignment on the role that you want to play, and then basically going out and doing it, not making it too complicated for the business, allowing business to have a single point of contact. Those are the lessons for that. For the broader transformation, I would say it's a couple of things. One important thing is all those different plays that we were talking about, operating model, agile at scale, next gen infrastructure like cloud and automation, talent, architecture, security, data. These 10 plays that we talk about, they are all, you can't do them in silos. So that's why when I'm talking to technology leader and say, so what are we doing? Well, this year we are going to do agile, okay? Or this year we are doing architecture, right? Or this year we're doing cloud. It's very hard to just do one of these. You cannot get value from one of these because they're all interdependent and linked to each other. Which means that at any one point you will be executing 2 or 3 plays at least. At least we think that you should be doing a few plays at a time. So I think one big lesson is recognizing that these are interrelated plays, and to get most value out of them, sometimes you will need to actually execute on a few of them at the same time, right? So that's one thing. And second thing is that we call it a marathon of sprints, okay? Which means that you quickly basically look at a couple of plays, you quickly do them, then you do the next one. This whole thing is going to take a few years, right? It took decades to get here. It's going to take a few years to start to transform this. So we call it a bit of a marathon of sprints. So you want to move very quickly on very specific plays. You want to move quickly, but recognize that ultimately this is a 3-year journey, right? Now, it's a little bit, again, goes back to your question earlier, it's a little bit up to you how you want to choreograph the journey or how you want to sequence this journey. If cost is going to be a huge issue for you, then maybe you pull plays that allow you to take costs out quickly, right? And use that to fund it. If cost is less of a play, but the more important thing is quality and velocity of delivery, right? Then maybe you want to start with a play like Agile or and a couple of supporting plays where you move quickly. At the end of the day, though, I will tell you one thing: op model almost always is one of the first places to start, which is the whole topic of the conversation today. So you would want to start with op model. It should be one of the places where you start with, and the others nicely complemented.
Perfect. Now in this region, it's a little bit harder to get great talent, right? You mentioned talent before. It's part of the journey of how to get them, how to then think straight. Can you give us some advice on, how to think about talent in this context?
I think in that sense, COVID has changed a lot of things, including our notion of where talent sits and basically how remote work from home or remote working models work. And if anything, it has actually increased our appetite for those. So I am actually seeing a very strong push. I have clients who are, even in the US, for example, where I live, we have clients who are in areas which are not perhaps the most attractive regions for top talent to be there, right? However, I would be lying if I didn't say that every single one of my clients and organizations I work with are now putting together very clear talent strategies for remote working models. So I have a client who is in this one region where it really is very hard to find talent, but they are saying that now everybody's working remotely. Who cares, right? And then sometimes these are more cultural hangups. Sometimes they were a little bit more just mental hangups, a little bit like, how can this even work? But now that part of it is working, it's not here to completely replace it. Let me be very honest. I don't know if the completely remote model works all the time, right? But for many of the roles, and at least for much of the year, you can still have a setup where somebody comes and visits and builds that relationship that only happens when you're meeting with someone in person, sharing a meal and looking at them face to face across the table. You can still create those opportunities over time, but you don't need that every day of the week. You don't need that. So I think one thing that this, if anything, for the region, it's good news is that you can actually be much more expansive in your sources for talent and where you go look for it. Right? That's the one biggest unlock. The second thing is there's also a view that a lot of the talent is going to come available soon, given that some of the companies have fallen on hard times, and there have been, like, particularly if you look at the travel industry, if you look at some of the restaurant industry, some of these industries, you're seeing basically attrition in their organizational side. So I think there's talent coming on the market. So I think there is an opportunity for companies that are able to and that are looking to actually reach out to and capture the talent before others do.
Very good. Naufal, thanks a lot, especially for spending so much time with us and sharing a bit of your expertise on this. I think we could probably go on forever. With a look on the time, I think the hour is about to be up. So let me end with a closing thought from your side. It's like, what is your future operating model look like? Where's this whole thing going if we move it 5 years? What should I have on my radar if I think about the future?
I think it goes back to the original notion of what role will technology play. Technology will continue to play a greater role. I think ultimately, just like today, we have CFOs who ultimately are in good line for succession to be CEOs. I think that the next round of CEOs is going to be either your business savvy tech leaders or tech savvy business leaders. So I think it's not so much on the operating model question, but it's much more of a broader question that the role will continue to become more and more increasingly important, and therefore the need for technology actually have a much stronger partnership and linkage with the business is more than ever. I think that's the direction we are going to keep moving towards.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
You bet. It was my pleasure. Thank you, everyone.